So let's talk about more effective technical presentations. When this started out, I was thinking in terms of technical presentations, but as I developed the slide deck, I realized that a lot of the content here is a lot more general. So there's a slight technical slant, but really a lot of these points you can apply in any kind of presentation. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start from a quote from a well-known book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this was one quote that really stuck out to me as I read the book. Why do we talk about what we want? That is childish. Of course you are interested in what you want. You are eternally interested in it, but no one else is. The rest of us are just like you. We are interested in what we want. So the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. This book was written in the 1930s, I believe, and it kind of shows that the style is very much of a different age. But I encourage you to check out the book anyways. There are a lot of truth bombs like this littered all over the place, so it's really worth reading if you want to further develop your influence. So to build on that, I want to lay out a couple of what I think are cold hard facts about communication. When you're thinking about presenting something, assume that your audience doesn't really care about what you have to say. It's usually true. In most cases, people will give you 30 to 60 seconds to make them care. But if you don't capture their attention by then, their eyes start to glaze over. They start to think about their own issues and what they have to deal with, and their day-to-day work. So you really have a small window of opportunity to catch that attention. So make those first 30 to 60 seconds really count. The second point about communication is that it's really not about what you have to say or what you want to express. It's really much, much more important what your audience is able to receive. So it doesn't matter if you go through tons of material if your audience, for whatever reason, isn't able to absorb that information. Leading into the presentation, you should have some sense of what your audience is able to digest. And if you don't, you probably have some homework to do to figure that out. With respect to knowing your audience, a couple of things to really understand is, what does your audience care about? What are their pain points? What keeps them up at night? What fires are they fighting currently that might distract them? What can you do to make their lives better? In addition to what they care about, you should also have a sense of how much context do they have. What is their function? Are they an engineer? Are they a product manager? Are they an engineering manager? Because each of those functions can carry a very different context. With respect to the topic that you're discussing, do you need to educate your audience so that you can better communicate your ideas? Or do you just simply need to refresh their context so they're just pointing in the same direction? Do you need to spend time ahead of the presentation to prime your audience for the presentation? Oftentimes, there could be some questions that you might be able to anticipate and kind of iron out in a one-on-one session before you do the presentation to make that presentation go smoother. So the next thing to think about is, what do you want your audience to walk away with? So again, it's not about how much content you can throw at them. What do they walk away from the conversation with, right? What do they actually retain out of your presentation? And what you need to do is to basically build your presentation around those core ideas that you want them to walk away from. Typically, you should have 1 to 3 key ideas that you really want them to digest and walk away with, and the rest of your presentation should be supporting ideas and details that strengthen those ideas, right? And the reason why it's important to have this structure is that your presentation will fade over time in the memories of your audience, right? So when you start out, you throw a kick-ass presentation and your audience is really engaged and gets what you're trying to say. But over time, the content starts to fade. So after a week, they may no longer remember the details and the supporting ideas, and the idea starts to become a little bit more vague. Over a course of another week or two, even the supporting ideas start to fade, and at the end of 2 or 3 weeks, all you might have are just the core ideas, and then after a month or two, maybe all that's left with them is that general idea. So this is inevitable. This will happen, with any presentation. But if you structure your ideas correctly, there's a greater chance that the most important ideas will stick with them longer. On the flip side, if you're overloading your audience with ideas and charts and lots of details that they aren't able to structure together, And after a couple of weeks, the key ideas that you wanted to communicate would no longer stick with them. So a natural question to ask is, how do you structure your ideas in a way that makes it easier to retain? And there's an answer to that already. Some of the most well-respected directors are respected because they are masters at storytelling. Human beings seem to be hardwired to follow narratives, and the better the story that you can tell, the more likely it is that your audience will retain the ideas that you're trying to communicate. So what does that mean in terms of technical presentations? So similar to how movies have story arcs, your presentation should also have a story arc or a narrative arc, a begin, middle, and end. And depending on the type of presentation you do, they might have a different arc. So one example of an arc is a presentation where you might want to align your audience towards some decision, right? So first of all, you start with a problem statement, one that's compelling and one that captures the attention of your audience. Starting with a problem statement is key because you want to let your audience know that you understand a problem that they care about. And this is how you get them on the same side and to get to pay attention to the rest of the presentation. But recognizing the problem is just a start. From there, you can delve deeper into the problem and give your audience some insight to the problem that they perhaps haven't thought about before. And this is important because you want your audience to not only see that you recognize the same problems that they see, but that you see the problem in a deeper level than perhaps they realize. This also helps to keep your audience engaged because this helps them learn something new about a problem that they perhaps have taken for granted. So once you've identified the problem and revealed some insights, hopefully the direction to a solution becomes more obvious. The reason why the tie-in between the insight and the solution is important is because the more your audience can see the connection between the problem and the insights and the solution, the more likely they will be aligned to whatever solution you're presenting, right? It's one thing to beat somebody over the head and say, hey, I know the right solution. It's another thing entirely for the audience to realize the solution on their own, because then they share some of the ownership of that solution. And then finally, after you have the solution laid out, the next logical step is a call to action, right? We all see the problem, we understand how bad it is, the solution is obvious, so the next obvious thing to do is to fix it. And then that's where you want to end with the call to action. That's where you want to get people to sign off or to prove something or to commit resources, and basically take the alignment that you've built and turn that into some meaningful action. So that's one example. Another example story arc might be something that you would use for information sharing. So the way it might go is something like, you talk about the status quo and the cost of the status quo, and how things aren't ideal. You provide a overview of the solution from a high level, and ideally one that addresses the cost that you highlighted in the first part of the presentation. And the overview is important because you might want to lay out a map for the demo you would do in the next step. Oftentimes when you do a demo, there's a lot of information and a lot of details, and you really want to focus your audience attention on the aspects of the demo that are most important. Then the next step would be to actually do the demo, and this is where you make the solution concrete. So the previous step is abstract and it sounds nice, but oftentimes the solution is not real until your audience sees it with their own eyes. And then once you've done the demo and hopefully the audience is impressed and it's real, the next step would be to encourage your audience to check it out for themselves. You make it even more real. So it's not something that you're showing off, but if it's something that they find useful, give them the resources to check it out for themselves. Right? So those are a couple of examples. And the point here isn't that these are, two ideal story arcs. These are just a couple of arcs that you can use to kind of tie a narrative together. They've worked reasonably well for me, but there could be a whole bunch of different kind of arcs depending on what your goals are. But in a nutshell, you probably have a lot of complicated ideas that you want to communicate, and tying them together in a narrative is often a good way to help your audience retain that information. And then the final step is to simplify. What will probably happen as you build up your presentation is that you're going to have a lot of information in there, and it may not all be necessary. It's worth taking a few passes of your presentation and basically ask yourself these three questions, right? For every idea that you're communicating in the presentation, is it essential to actually build up the idea? Does it further strengthen a core idea that you're trying to convey? Does it clarify the message that you're trying to convey? And if the answer is no, it's probably better to simplify and to strip it out. You often hear that less is more, and that is certainly true with presentations. Okay, so that about covers it. So in summary, my recommendation would be, start off assuming that people don't care about what you have to say. Work hard in making them care. Talk about something that they care about, or talk about it in a way that they would care about it more. Certainly know your audience. Know what context they have, know what they care about. And optimize your presentation according to that information. You want to start off with the ideas that you want your audience to walk away with, and then organize your presentation around supporting those key ideas. You can do that by tying these ideas in a narrative with a begin, middle, and end, which you can adjust depending on the type of presentation you're giving. And finally, go back through the presentation and simplify. So this has been some very general advice on how to conduct more effective presentations. It's really just scratching the surface. I could go into a lot more detail about each aspect of the points I talked about, but I thought it was more important to go over the most important and key aspects of it. If you are interested in hearing more, or if there are any specific aspects about this that you would like me to dig into more detail, please do reach out and let me know. I'll be happy to spend more time on it. Okay, thanks.